Since I was here last spring, we saw Sandra Bland happen, Freddie Gray, Baltimore uprising. We saw a girl being dragged out of her classroom. We saw Laquan McDonald being shot 16 times in Chicago. And obviously I'm leaving out events. I mean, I know I am, but that's just because it's just happening so much to the point where we almost forget about Baltimore because we're talking about Flint. Like all of these events that are happening simultaneously make us almost forget that the momentum and the magnitude of everything that's going on, but it's important for us to remind ourselves of all these sort of people, and I thought it was cool because I was walking down here and I saw on some of the classrooms the various names of all the different people. And I think it's important for us to remind ourselves of all these names, so we don't forget, because right now, I mean, this is sort of what it feels like to be in history, I don't really know what it feels like before because I'm still young, I'm not that much older than you, but I can imagine if we were around during, what we call the civil rights era, whatever that means, because I feel like right now is the civil rights era, but I'm sure that's what it felt like to see all of these events sort of happening simultaneously and to see what it means and what change looks like and what the forces of change look like. And, ultimately what Black history looks like, And so I'm here, to talk about Black history. And I think, growing up, when I heard about Black history in elementary school and middle school, even now I work up at Wildwood. Did anyone go to Wildwood here? Yeah, there we go. I'm up there, Monday through Friday. We are also having our struggles of what Black history is and why Black history matters and what types of stories do we need to be talking about when we think about Black history. Because I think, and maybe all of y'all can vouch with me, is when we grow up hearing about Black history, we're hearing about, the pretty stuff. We're hearing about the first dude to invent the traffic light. Or we're hearing about how Rosa Parks just decided to not stand up out of her seat. And all of these things are great, all of these things matter. But we also need to be talking about the history that isn't pretty, the history that's ugly. We good? We good? All right. Maybe I need to move this up. Can y'all hear me all right? Yeah? All right, cool. But I think just like Black history needs to have more nuance, it needs to have more complexities, it needs to be raw, honest, and we need to start talking about a lot of different things, not just talking about, Martin Luther King and his I Had a Dream speech, but really looking at all of the nuances of Martin Luther King, looking at how he was so committed to nonviolence that he was one of the most outspoken critics towards the end of his life against the United States and President Lyndon B. Johnson in the war in Vietnam, because he knew if he's going to be telling people to be nonviolent in Birmingham while they're getting hit with hoses and little kids are getting, dogs thrown at them, that you can't also be okay with, the United States going in Vietnam and hitting napalm on little kids. Like, that doesn't make sense. And that was what Martin Luther King was talking about. He went on record on TV, and you guys can look this stuff up on YouTube, where he calls the United States the greatest perpetrator of violence in the world. He said that in 1968. That's crazy. And he was so committed to that sort of ideology that it caused, the United States government to sort of, remove him as the leader of the movement. It caused so many other leaders to distance themselves from him. But he didn't care because he was committed to this sort of message. Also looking at sort of how we started to realize, it wasn't just about race, but the issue was also about race and class, and how you can mobilize people and have a much stronger movement when you're not just looking at, Black people and talking about their rights, but also looking at how corrupt this economic system is and how it's impacting not just Black people, but white people alike. And we're seeing that today, with, Bernie Sanders, and so many other people where, they're saying the biggest issue right now is income inequality, And so when I think about Black history, I'm thinking about those things, but I'm also thinking about what's the history that adequately defines Black people, us, Black people, understanding what Blackness is, how history has shaped our definitions of who we are as Black people, and how essential that is to looking at everything that's happening around us. When you understand Black history, looking at, I think about Black history as all those things I just mentioned, but I also think about what it means to be Black and how that has been defined by various things. So you look at the 19th century, and this is stuff I talked about last year, and I'm going to just touch upon it now. It's sort of, you get the one drop rule, which, defines who is black, and the laws that further made slavery something that wasn't just based on class, but was race-based, because for a while, slavery wasn't just black people being slaves, it was blacks and whites, but the powers that be knew that that sort of system wouldn't sustain itself, because there was rebellions that happened where blacks and whites were uniting together, and they were messing things up. They were killing people. There's a movie out right now called Birth of a Nation, not the old Birth of a Nation, but y'all should check it out. It's about Nat Turner's rebellion, and that sort of stuff that people were scared of. They were scared that slaves would be like, hey, this ain't cool, so let's unite with these white people who are also slaves, and let's try and free ourselves. And that was happening real commonly. So we had to create a way where, to divide that sort of lower class. And what they did was they made slavery race-based. And so slavery became something that was for life, and whites then became indentured servants or nothing at all. And sort of, you figured out this way to where, hey, no matter what you have, you can still be better than if you're black. And so you start to see that sort of relationship happening over throughout history. You start to see, even after slavery ended, when we look at, what black history is, and we look at these amendments, where you got, they're freeing slaves and slavery's seen as being unconstitutional. But at the same time, you still have blacks being put into prisons and the convict lease system where their labor is being exploited for the benefit of businesses. You have blacks being herded into prisons, because if you're a free slave and you don't have any work or unemployment, that's seen as being illegal. So you have all these people just existing and being put into prison for no other reason, for just being free. And so then what happens is it's like, well, we're living in these racist forces like the South, so what are we gonna do, And the only places that were offering them jobs was the same plantations they were on as they were slaves, but then you got sharecropping, and then you got the system that's creating more debt, because now, the blacks have to pay rent for their sharecropping, but just the way the systems were working was you're paying, less than what the land actually costs, so then your labor is not actually equaling out. And so what happens is you can work your whole life and never get out of debt, but actually be in worse debt than when you started. And this is how we further create this caste system. This is how we further create inequality. And this is what continually happens. You have, the 14th Amendment, which says, all right, blacks are free, but they're also citizens. Because for a while, blacks weren't even seen as being citizens of the United States. A lot of people wanted blacks to go back to Africa after they were freed from slavery. I don't know if you guys know that, but that was real. Even Abraham Lincoln, he was one of the people who said that. He said, you know what, maybe you guys shouldn't be here because maybe we can't do this black and white thing. And so, but eventually they said, you know what, we're going to grant them citizenship. But at the same time, what does citizenship mean? Citizenship means you can be protected by the law. It means you can be recognized in the court of law. It means that you can sort of just exist and have rights and be granted all of these various things. But that wasn't the case, and we see why. You look up Ida B. Wells, she's a journalist, check it out. I'm just gonna be dropping major names, if y'all wanna write this down, and look these up later, because these are some major keys in the game. But Ida B. Wells was one of the most outspoken critics of lynching in the South. I don't know if you guys know what lynching is, but basically lynching was, I don't want to say state sanctioned, but it might as well have been, where people decided to take the law in their own hands and punish black people with death. And a lot of these things happened. At the height of lynching in the South in around 1890, 1.5 African Americans, primarily men, were lynched in the South. So just to conceptualize that number, think about every week we see one Trayvon Martin, one Mike Brown, one Laquan McDonald, one Sandra Bland, every week. And it's happening a lot right now, but just imagine that every single week. And it wasn't like these things were hidden. You look up online and you see these pictures and you see black bodies being hung from trees in front of town halls, courthouses. You see people crowding around the bodies, smiling, taking pictures. You see little kids there. You see sheriffs there. You see police officers. You see the mayor. All of these sort of things were allowed. And so you start to question, sort of what this government stands for. If we're saying, you know what, slavery is illegal, but we're still going to keep these people in some sort of bondage. These people are still going to be citizens of this country, but but we're not really going to acknowledge it. You know, before Malcolm X died, what he started to realize was lynching, because when Malcolm X was around, this was still going on. You look up Emmett Till, and Malcolm X was like, you know what? We're talking about civil rights, but what if we take this to the next level? What if we present sort of this mass case of lynching in front of the United Nations and talk about a human rights issue where people are being killed, there's a genocide going on, and put the United States on a global platform? You know, that's sort of the stuff he was looking at before he died, but that's not really the history we hear about. But that's sort of how we have to think about it. And that's sort of what we're seeing right now. We're seeing sort of this complicity with bodies being slain. You know, the same way you see bodies being hung from trees in these pictures where everyone's crowding around it, I mean, you can make the same argument right now, where we have videos of people being shot 16 times, tasered, beaten, and we're still able to justify it, to where we can see a girl being pulled up by her hair out of a classroom and still say, well, what did she do to deserve that? Where we can see a 12-year-old boy being killed for carrying a toy gun and saying, well, why was he carrying a toy gun? You know, that's how white supremacy functions. You know, for 100 years, even after blacks could vote, they couldn't actually vote. You know, we don't talk about this history, but, you know, blacks would be beaten, they'd be killed, they could be fired from their job if they registered to vote. You had poll taxes, you had all these different things keeping blacks from really gaining any sort of equality. You know, and this is the history of black people. This is black history. This is not pretty, it's not fun, it's not enjoyable to hear about, but that's sort of what went down. Yeah. 2 minutes, okay. So this is sort of the history where Tamir Rice can happen. You know, this is sort of what all we see can happen. You know, and we're seeing all of these things happen on a genocidal level. You know, and if you look around this room, you know, I mean, these people, Tamir Rice, Jordan Davis, Mike Brown, a lot of these people are your ages. A lot of these people are just a little bit older than you. A lot of these people are younger than you. And a lot of this is your world. You might not see it in Amherst, but some of y'all are going to go to college. You're going to go to New York. You might go to Chicago. You might go down south. And the way you walk, maybe the way you talk, maybe the way you sag your pants, or just your attitude might not work with what the world's telling us to do. But, you know, we're still going to face these repercussions, and this is why it's important to have these conversations. So I got to wrap up because I got like 2 minutes or 1 minute. But I'm wearing a shirt right now, and y'all are probably wondering who's on it. This is James Baldwin. I don't know if they teach James Baldwin here, but that's another name to pick up. I brought his book in case y'all know, Fire Next Time. And I just want to leave with a quote that he says, you know, when he's talking about America and sort of how we need to look at America. And he says, "I love America more than any other country in the world, and exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually." And he further states, "Love does not begin and end the way we seem to think it does. Love is a battle, love is a war, love is growing up." And so I think this idea that us having these conversations, you know, this notion that if we're going to be honest and talk about this ugly history, all of a sudden that makes us un-American or unpatriotic. But I kind of think the other way around. You know, I think like, you know, the same way you want to be honest with those people you love because you want them to aspire to be everything that they're meant to be, I think we need to start looking at America that sort of way. I think we need to start looking at Black history as a chance to really be honest about this sort of past that we have, even if it's ugly, even if it's nasty, even if it makes us feel uncomfortable, even if it makes us question our own identities as privileged people and how we benefit from these systems or how we don't benefit from these systems. And in order for us to keep moving forward, because if we keep ignoring this history, we're just going to keep repeating it. Cool. So I'll hand it over to the breakout groups and Noreen Swan.